Hello, everybody. We are going to get started on linguistic anthropology. This would be an introduction to linguistic anthropology. This is based off of chapter 9. So let's get started. All right. So what is something you could tell about someone by the way they speak? All right. And this is a little bit hard to kind of think about because sometimes you do it so quickly that it's like almost automatic, right? So people always talk about like, oh, if whether or not, they're from USA or not, basically talking about accents, which is, a good observation. But there's also a lot of other things, right? You can tell someone's level of aggression usually by when they talk to you. You can tell if someone is happy, sad. You can tell like a little bit about their emotional state. You can tell a lot of times the situation that they're in, right? So if they're speaking to somebody in a very formal way, it could be their boss, it could be their, you know, parents, I don't know, right? How are what are the words like they're using? Does it sound like something that they would usually say? Are they simplifying what they're saying? Maybe because they're talking to a kid. There's a lot of things that you can kind of tell by the way someone speaks. Okay. So what is language, right? Linguistics is a scientific study of language, and language is a system of arbitrary vocal sounds that enables humans to communicate with each other in ways not seen among other animals. It is also used to encode and communicate about humans' experience of the world and one another. It is a key component of human symbolic creativity. Okay, so it's very important though here to kind of differentiate between linguistic anthropology and um, and linguistics. Okay, linguistics is very concerned with um, the language itself, right? Like the grammar, the conjunctions, the verbs, all this other stuff. Linguistic anthropology, while they are, partially concerned about that, they're also concerned about other things that might be affecting the language, right? Such as cultural factors or biological factors. So what makes human language so distinct are these specific characteristics right here. There are 6 of them. Okay. The first one, I don't know where to put this little thing. It's always in the way. The first one is human language. Sorry, the first one is openness, right? The ability to understand the same thing from different points of view. The second one is arbitrariness, the no link between particular linguistic sounds and means. The third one is duality of patterning, which is simply sound and meaning. Displacement, the ability to talk about absent or non-existent objects and past or future events as easily as we discuss our immediate situations. Semanticity, association of linguistic signals with aspects of the social, cultural, and physical world in which speakers live. And finally, prevarication, to make statements or ask questions that violate convention. Now, I'm going to go through these one by one and give you an example. So openness, right? Understand something from different points of view. This is very straightforward. Um, if I were to tell you I went to a steakhouse last night and it was terrible, I hated the steak. If someone else told you, oh, I went to the steakhouse last night and it was great. I loved the potatoes. Someone else told you, oh, it was okay. I really like the decor. These are all different ways we can understand the same thing. And I know, again, this sounds very odd, but for other animals and other, organisms, when you describe something from different perspectives, they cannot think of it differently. It's only one way, right? Um, for example, monkey communication is closed, right? So they can't really describe something from different points of view. Or sorry, they can't really understand something from different points of view. Arbitrariness. There is no link between the particular linguistic sounds and means. The example they have in the textbook is boy. Obviously, boy in English means a young man, but I forgot what language they had. It was an African language, but in the other African language makes something else, right? And so for example, the word apple, apple in English means apple. In Spanish, it's manzana, and in Chinese, it's pinguo, right? These are all different ways of saying the same thing. That thing has no biological or whatever connection to the sound itself, right? The sound arbitrariness is another way of saying random. Basically, what this is saying is that the sounds that we use to associate with meaning are random. Okay. Or sorry, not that they're random, that they have no biological connection with the actual thing. Okay. Duality of patterning, the fact that there is a sound and there's a meaning that comes from that sound. That's duality patterning. Displacement, ability to talk about absent or non-existent objects and past or future events as easily as we discuss our immediate situations. So I can describe to you something that happened last year, or something that I think is going to happen in the future, or something that is not even right here, right now, as easily as I can describe to you, that I'm in front of my computer speaking to you about linguistic anthropology, right? So like I could talk about, oh, last year, it was a really fun time I had at, in San Francisco with my dad, right? I could also talk to you about, oh, next time I'm in San Francisco, I'm going to take my dad to eat at this restaurant, right? So the first statement is a statement from the past. Second statement, statement from the future. I can talk about those two just as easily as I talk about my current situation right now. In addition, I could talk about absent or non-existent things, such as, if I was in a rocket ship, I would, um, do cartwheels, right? I'm not even in the rocket ship, but I can talk about it as if I'm there right now. Okay. Semanticity, the association of linguistic signals with aspects of the social, cultural, and physical world in which the speakers live. So basically, the influence of society and culture onto the way we communicate is semanticity, right? So for example, in job interview situations, it is important that you're more polite and don't curse, for example. If you are in that position, if you are going to be interviewed for a job, semanticity is our ability to kind of change the way we're speaking depending on that situation, right? So like again, whether you're speaking to your friends or the person job interviewing you, you would have a different way of speaking. That is semanticity because the cultural and societal influences on the way you speak. Last one is prevarication, to make statements or ask questions that violate convention. This is basically the ability for you to break the rules of language is prevarication. And it is these six things that make human language so special. While there are many intelligent animals and the way that animals communicate is very interesting and unique, they are not human language, right? When we're talking about human language, it needs to have every one of these characteristics in order for it to be human language. And most animals, while they have some of them, just do not have all of them. Okay. So call systems are very different from language. Call systems are shared by humans and other primates. Human and non-human primate call systems are not equal to human language. Non-human primate call systems do not map onto elements of some human symbolic language. Human call systems are controlled by different part of the brain than language, right? So there is this thing called call systems. Call systems is our ability to do things like cry or laugh or kind of like the reaction of being scared. These are things that are call systems, right? And regardless of what culture, sometimes it is, crying, for example, is looked at as a sad, it's associated with being sad, right? What is sad, obviously, is different from culture to culture. However, our ability to cry, our ability to laugh, our ability to do all these things are part of this communication system called call systems, right? And even though, you're communicating with the noise, call systems and human language are completely different. Okay. Now, call systems actually are shared with other primates. So when you, for example, are laughing or crying, it is something that is understandable by other primates. That being said, the main difference between call systems and human language is essentially that call systems are biologically inherited, right? They're natural. They come with you basically as you're born. Human language is something that is learned, right? So it is important though to note that even though it may seem like they are languages, like laughing, crying, all this other stuff, they are not. They are call systems, right? They are so different actually that they aren't even in the same part of the brain. So please make sure to keep that in mind. Call systems and language are two very different things. All right, language and culture. So language is a bioculture phenomenon. The human brain and anatomy of the mouth and throat give the humans the capacity for language. Languages are cultural products and embedded in meanings and behavioral patterns. Anthropologists recognize that the way people use language provides clues to how they understand their world and themselves. So when we're looking at this, right, I am obviously a cultural anthropologist, so I'm going to kind of give you a biased perspective, but there is a large biological component to linguistic anthropology. We're just not going to get into it that much, okay? But things that study like, oh, how does our body, like the, what's it called, the trachea and our lungs and everything, how does that add into, or how does that play into us using language as a whole, right? That's a biological anthropology question, or sorry, a biological geared linguistic anthropology question, right? But for other things that are cultural, right, it really talks about the context in which language is used, right? So for example, you changing your language during a job interview, how do you know how to do that? What indicates to you that you need to change the way you speak? Okay. All right. So language and culture, right? Anthropological study of language reveals that symbolic language permits humans to communicate, but also sets up barriers. Cultural factors shape language use. There is no single best way for humans to communicate their experiences. And finally, a common code within the larger speech community counters individual efforts to create a unique voice. So, this is kind of a big, like, cultural part of it, right? So remember how we talked about human imagination and culture and how basically it doesn't follow any kind of rules, because if it followed certain types of rules, then we'd all kind of think the same, or we come to the same conclusions, but we are individuals and the way that culture affects us differently, right? Now, it's the same thing with language, right? Ironically, when we develop language, it is ultimately a way to communicate with other people. But you could argue that the creation of language actually creates more miscommunication between individuals instead of encouraging communication. Now, the reason why that's brought up is because it is cultural, right? And that's the important point here, is that because it's cultural, you cannot predict the outcome of how language develops or how the result is going to be, right? Remember, human imagination and culture in this particular case is very unpredictable. Cultural factors shape language use, right? We already talked about that. What is happening in your culture or how your culture views certain types of language is going to deeply affect how you use language. There's no single best way for humans to communicate their experiences. What this is saying is essentially there's no such thing as a better or worse language. As long as a language is developed as a Homo sapien, as a modern human, that language is equally complex to other languages. Okay. And finally, this is actually reaction to an interesting question that a student had for me a long time ago. The student asked me like, okay, so if language is all cultural, right, which is learned, why don't we just develop our own unique language, right? And there's a couple parts to that. The first thing is there's a common code within your speech community that will stop you from creating your own language, right? So for example, if you're a baby and you hold up a pineapple and you're like, pear, pear, right? Your parents are probably gonna point at it and be like, yo, this is a pear. This is not a pineapple, a pear, right? That is a way of kind of um, restricting your unique language from coming out, from you creating your unique language. And then, of course, number two is the more obvious thing is if you don't know how to communicate, like you in your society, then you won't be able to connect with anybody for anything, right? So that also kind of counters your effort to create individual language. Okay. Actually, this is kind of similar to Judith Butler, and when they talked about how there are regulatory forces for gender, right? So basically, like the example I gave in class was, when a little boy takes out a pink folder, they get made fun of by the other boys in the class or by other kids in the class. That will encourage that boy and show everyone that boys should not have pink folders. It is similar in this way, right? Where you might say something incorrectly, and your family maybe will penalize you, or you might write things incorrectly, and school might penalize you, whatever. Okay. Or if you say it correctly or write it correctly, then it will encourage you. It's the same thing, right? It's just that there's certain forces that kind of keep it in line. Great. Anthropologists distinguish between language and languages. Language is an abstract property belonging to humans as a whole, and languages are the specific ways groups of people communicate, right? So this is important. Language is kind of like what we talked about, the thing that has the six characteristics, right? Human language. Languages are things like Spanish, English, Chinese, so on and so forth. All modern human groups have fully developed languages. Languages are not simply an elaboration of the call system used by ancestors. Languages use symbols that arbitrarily stand for something else. Learning a new language is challenging, not simply a matter of learning new labels, but must learn the cultural context of words, right? So, um, again, I've already said this, but the first one is, all modern humans have fully developed languages. There are not better or worse languages. Languages are not an elaboration of call systems, meaning they are completely unrelated, right? And finally, the languages use symbols that arbitrarily stand for something else. We already went over this one as well, right? Where basically the words we choose for certain definitions, we choose them. It's not that they have a natural connection to the sound that we're making. Now, this last thing, right? When we're thinking about learning a new language, it's not necessarily um, just learning the definition of words, but it's also understanding the cultural context for certain words, right? So when we talk about a fluency in a language, it's not just understanding the words themselves, but it's also knowing how to use them in what situation, right? So, for example, in Chinese, which I can speak a pretty good amount, if I were going to, I think I've actually told this one before. If I'm going to a restaurant or something, it's pretty easy for me to communicate. Seeing my family, easy to communicate. Just meeting new people, pretty easy to communicate. However, for things like construction, completely, I have no idea. I don't know how to say a water heater in Chinese or drywall or whatever, right? So that's the importance of cultural context, right? If you were to interview me, for example, in Chinese, I would not be able to do so, or would not be able to do a good job answering the questions. Okay. All right. Communication. Human communication extends beyond unspoken and spoken language and includes the clothes that people wear, the length of time people keep each other waiting for them, body gestures or kinesics, the acceptable distance between two or more people in a social setting or proxemics, right? So this is just to say that included in linguistic anthropology, it's not just words, it's also other things, right? Clothes people wear. When you see if you see someone in a suit, what do you assume about them if I work in an office? If you see someone wearing a uniform and a badge, probably a cop. If you see someone wearing, that jacket or whatever, for the MTA people, right? They look a certain way as well. Okay. The length of time the length of time people keep others waiting for them, that's an interesting one. That's more of a cultural thing, but like that is also kind of language based as well, in the sense that it's like, or sorry, communication based as well, where it's kind of like, what are you communicating to the other person by being late or by being early? Body gestures or kinesics, right? Certain people, they like do different things with their hands when they speak. Certain people, they will, have different types of posture when they speak. For example, if you look at Diablo's posture and even Adam's posture versus someone on like the Daily Show, it's a very different body posture, right? And that's for a number of reasons, but that's the type of stuff that they look at. Another thing that they like to study is proxemics, which is the distance, like acceptable distance between two or more people, right? It's like if you guys have ever seen that advertisement for slow dancing in like middle school or high school, that religious one, they have like two of the students and they're both like at arm's length and they have like the leave room for Jesus thing, but basically don't get too close. That would be an example of studying proxemics, right? What is considered too close and what is considered too far in a dancing situation. Okay. All right. Human communication is multidimensional and can be examined using semiotics, the study of meaningful signs and their use. Signs are defined by their function. Icon looks like which it represents. Index points to is beside or is casually linked to that which it signifies. And finally, symbol is the mode of signification in which the sign bears no intrinsic connection to that which it represents. So this is not so important, but yeah, it's not that important. Um, but an icon, so like if you're looking for a sign for the bathroom, right? An icon would be something very simple, like on the front it would have like a toilet, so right behind the door is a bathroom. Index would be a toilet and an arrow pointing toward the door has a bathroom. And finally, symbol is completely disconnected, but it's like it could be in words saying like, the bathroom is the second door to your left. Okay. These are just different ways of communication that humans have. Now, speech represents spoken language. Language can be communicated, though, in unspoken ways, including writing, Morse code, American Sign Language. All these different forms of communication are analyzed by linguistic anthropologists. Human communication is the transfer of information from one person to another. Pretty straightforward. This is the fun one. So, speech communities are languages associated with discrete groups of people. Speech communities can best be seen as communities of practice, an aggregate of people who come together around a mutual engagement or in an endeavor, way of doing things, ways of talking, beliefs, values, power relations, and short practices emerge in the course of this mutual endeavor. So, what is so a speech community sounds really complicated, right? Aggregate of people who come together around mutual engagement and develop. Basically, their goal is the same thing, right? And the second thing, ways of doing what Tom believes values, while probably in short practices emerge in the course of this movement. Basically, because you're doing the same thing, certain types of common whatever it is, ways of talking, beliefs, values, whatever, come up, right? And that sounds very complicated, but it's not. Let's think about you guys ever watch Hell's Kitchen with Gordon Ramsay, right? That is a way of speaking that is for professional kitchens, right? A two top, four top, whatever, ready to serve 2 minutes or, whatever, behind, whatever they yell in the kitchen, right? It's English, but they're obviously developing their own kind of like sub language for, their particular job. Okay. This can be seen easily with the military and police officers, right? Where they have the kind of like their own thing on the radio, like 10-4, 10-4. I don't know what that, I think it means like over or whatever. And for a military like Alpha Bravo, Charlie, these are all different ways of communicating that they develop doing the same thing. Another great example is for those of you that play video games or team games or play Valorant or whatever. There are certain call outs that you do when opponents are, around the corner or describing where you are, whatever. You have your own words to describe the situation because you are all in that same situation, right? And this goes for anything. I'm sure there are certain words that Kingsborough students are very familiar with. There's definitely words that college students are aware of, like FAFSA, for example. You talk about FAFSA outside of college. I mean, what the heck are you talking about? But if you're in college, you kind of know what that is, right? Now the funny example that I have is actually, I don't know if you guys have ever seen that. It's like an older meme or video, but the guy is it's a joke, and the guy is part of the Bloods, and so he can't use the letter C, right? So instead of saying Coca-Cola, a cookie, the guy who's a blood says a bocabola and a bookie. Obviously, they are making fun of the situation, but that would be a great example of a speech community because in this particular case, because you are a blood, you have to speak a certain way. That is a great example of a speech community. Okay, so it's basically when you develop certain types of words or phrases or whatever it is to fit the stuff that you're doing. Okay. In some cases, it is to be a police officer, military person. In other cases, it might be to work in a professional kitchen. In some cases, it might be going to college. In some cases, it might be playing a video game. And in some cases, this might be being a gang member. Who knows? But the main point is when you are doing the same thing or after the same thing, you end up developing certain types of language to fit that thing. Okay. Now, so what's interesting though is that, right, like this, you're still using one language, right? So the cross-cultural differences in language use relate to context and frequency of occurrence. So, for example, 10-4 is obviously numbers in English that we recognize as 10 and 4, right? However, the context and the frequency of occurrence is different for police officers, right? The context is when they're done speaking, I'm assuming, I think that's what it is. And if the frequency of occurrence is every time they're on the radio. I only say 10 and 4 when I'm indicating some kind of number, right? But these people are using it, one, in a different context, which is to suggest that they're done speaking, and number two, very often because of how often they speak on the walkie-talkie. Okay. Very good. Last thing, patterning in language includes morphemes, syntax, semantics, and pragmatics. Morphemes are units of meaning. Syntax is sentence structure. Semantics is meaning. And finally, pragmatics is the use of language. Human language exhibit patterns at both levels, while non-human call systems do not. So if you look at human language, right, we can change the way we speak depending on our situation, like almost immediately. Like we do it so easy that you can't even like think about how to do it. But if you look at other animals, a lot of other animals cannot do that. They can only communicate one thing one way. Okay, great. So full circle, we can tell about some by the way they speak. We went over this already. But basically, if you look at all these things, there's a lot of cultural attachment to the way that people are speaking, right? So if some people are yelling and speaking really quickly and very sharply, you can kind of indicate like, oh, this person's mad. That is a kind of cultural association and understanding of how people are speaking, okay? And more importantly, if they are using certain types of language that indicate that they are if they're using certain types of language that you know what they mean, but it seems to be used in a weird way, that could also be a speech community, right? If someone's yelling at you, I have a two top, you're like, I have no idea what a two top is. But because that person is, I don't know, part of Hell's Kitchen, they the context is that they're yelling about what's next on the order. Okay. That's pretty much it. Have any questions? Just shoot me an email. Other than that, please have a nice day.